Overtime. Empty floor. That's when my boss leaned on the doorframe, gave me that plastic smile, and said the sentence that changed everything. Meet your replacement. He didn't even wait for my response. He just tilted his head toward the kid trailing behind him. Smug face, expensive haircut, a shirt so crisp it still had packaging creases, and left. No handshake, no introduction, just a dismissal wrapped in sarcasm. The kid looked at me like he'd already won. I know how this sounds. I've been in corporate long enough to see power games, but this one hit differently. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't hidden. It was loud enough that even the client, already waiting on the late call, overheard it through the open conference line. Silence followed, just long enough for me to hear the blood rush in my ears. Then the client cleared his throat. Shall we begin? If you've ever been blindsided like that, pushed under the bus by someone who signs your paychecks, you know the feeling. You want to freeze, to scream, to defend yourself, but you can't. Not when the client is listening, not when your livelihood depends on the illusion of control. So I sat down, logged in, and acted like everything was fine. Before I go further, if you've ever had a boss pull a stunt like this, you'll probably want to hear how it ended. I'll tell you everything. Just do me one favor. Hit subscribe, drop a like, because this one's not just another bad boss story. This one ends with a twist I couldn't have scripted. Back to that night. The office had the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every keystroke. Cleaning crews had already passed. Desks were dark, except ours. My laptop screen glowed against the glass walls of the meeting room. On the video call, 3 client managers stared back, notebooks open. Behind me, replacement boy. That's what I called him in my head. Took the seat like he owned it. No laptop, no prep materials. Just a smirk and a cup of overpriced coffee. Run us through the latest numbers, the client lead said. I clicked open the deck I'd spent the last week building, slides layered with financial projections, compliance checkpoints, and mitigation strategies. My boss had asked for 3 rounds of revisions, each more contradictory than the last. I stayed late every night polishing the narrative. This presentation wasn't just slides, it was survival. Halfway through my overview, the kid cut in, "What she means is that our strategic initiative is to streamline legacy dependencies." He threw jargon like confetti, words that meant nothing but sounded shiny. The client's camera stayed frozen for a moment, then one of them leaned back, pen tapping. "And what does that mean in terms of our actual compliance audit?" The kid blinked. Blank. I stepped in. "It means the new process removes the shadow vendors that could trigger audit flags. I've mapped each vendor against the regulatory framework." Slide 14. There was a pause, then a nod from the client lead. "Thank you. That's what I needed." Replacement boy leaned back like it was his idea all along. Inside, I burned, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I watched, because something else was happening. The client was recording timestamps. Every question, every answer, every delay, logged. That wasn't normal. They weren't just listening. They were auditing us too. And here's the part I'll never forget. While I was answering the next question, I saw out of the corner of my eye the kid forwarding one of my drafts to an external Gmail. Not company mail. Not the client's domain. A personal account. His fingers moved quick, casual, like he'd done it before. I made a note in my head. Not the kind you write down, the kind you burn into memory. By the end of the session, the client thanked me directly, twice. They didn't acknowledge him. My boss never returned. And I sat there in that sterile meeting room, the AC humming too loud, realizing I'd just been handed both a threat and an opportunity. Because when someone says, "Meet your replacement," they're really saying, "We think you're expendable." And when the client hears it too, suddenly everyone's being tested. That's when I decided I wasn't going to play defense anymore. You don't just end up in a late-night overtime call by accident. Nights like that are built, piece by piece, deadline by deadline, until suddenly You're the last one left carrying the load. The week leading up to that moment was a masterclass in sabotage disguised as management. My boss, let's call him Carter, had a talent for moving goalposts. Monday morning, he told me the client wanted a high-level strategy doc, no details. By Tuesday, it was too vague. Add more numbers. Wednesday, too many numbers. Strip it back. By Friday, the deck looked like it had been rebuilt from scratch 3 times, because it had. Each version carried his red lines, none consistent with the last. And yet when the client asked why updates were late, Carter would shrug, sigh, and say, "We're working on getting her up to speed." Her. Me. That's the kind of casual undercutting that doesn't show up in HR files. It shows up in the looks you get on client calls, the subtle pauses before someone trusts your answer. It wears you down, makes you second-guess everything, and that's exactly the point. By Thursday night, when most of the floor had emptied out, Carter dropped by my desk. "You'll stay on this, right? Big opportunity for visibility." He said it like he was doing me a favor. I didn't argue. Arguing never changed anything with him. He thrived on plausible deniability. If I pushed back, he'd call me defensive. If I stayed silent, he'd call me not proactive enough. Either way, he won. So I stayed. I stayed through the cleaning crew, through the vending machine hum, through the hours when the building's air vents sounded louder than my thoughts. That's how the kid, my so-called replacement, slipped in. No onboarding, no announcement. Just appeared one evening with a badge already printed. His name was Ryan, but the way Carter said it. My nephew, bright future, fresh perspective. You'd think he was a Silicon Valley prodigy. In reality, Ryan couldn't find a compliance clause if it was highlighted in neon, but he had access to everything. My shared drive, the client folders, even the internal Slack channels that usually required weeks of permissions. I noticed the ghost invites too. Meetings on my calendar I never created. 30-minute syncs with no description. I'd decline them, then find out later Carter had met with the client without me, or worse, with Ryan. It wasn't paranoia, it was patterned. One night, while combing through version histories, I spotted something that stopped me cold. A hidden folder labeled Pilot. It wasn't mine, it wasn't standard, and it wasn't small. Dozens of subfiles, most with names like Streamline Model V3 and Fast Track C. Inside, draft contracts and workflows that bypassed the compliance steps I'd spent months reinforcing. They looked shiny, efficient, and utterly reckless. If the client adopted even one of those processes, they'd be in violation of half their own regulatory agreements. And the kicker? The file owner was Ryan. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about replacing me because I was too expensive, or too slow, or too careful. It was about planting someone who would deliver a shortcut the client didn't ask for, but Carter promised anyway, a shortcut that could blow back on me if I wasn't careful. I kept quiet, not out of fear, but strategy, because sometimes you learn more by watching the rope get longer. Meanwhile, the little things piled up. Carter forgot to copy me on key emails. He introduced Ryan as shadowing for leadership development. I'd log in to find my drafts mysteriously altered. Numbers shifted just enough to look wrong. It wasn't sloppy work. It was intentional. Make me look unreliable. Make Ryan look like the fixer. The client noticed, though. They didn't say it outright, but their tone changed. Questions aimed directly at me grew sharper, more detailed. They didn't want Carter's vision or Ryan's buzzwords. They wanted receipts, proof, hard numbers that survived an audit. So I doubled down. Every late night, I kept 2 copies, the one Carter demanded and the clean one. Every deck, every spreadsheet, every projection had a shadow. Twin, accurate, compliant, time-stamped. If Carter wanted chaos, fine. But I was building my own case file, line by line. And here's the part I can't shake. I wasn't the only one watching. The client was testing us too. They were tracking every discrepancy, every version. I saw it in their eyes when Ryan tried to smooth talk them with phrases like leveraging synergies and scalable disruption. They didn't buy it. They wrote it down. The trap wasn't mine to spring. It was already being set by the very people Carter thought he could fool. But I wasn't about to wait and hope they noticed. I needed evidence, more than screenshots, more than hunches. Evidence so tight that when the collapse came, I wouldn't just survive it. I'd walk out stronger. So I started collecting. Corporate tests don't look like pop quizzes. They look like innocent questions asked with polite smiles. They look like silence after an answer that doesn't sit right. They look like pens tapping on notepads when you thought the meeting was just routine. The next big session wasn't supposed to be high stakes. On paper, it was just a working session. 3 client managers, me, and of course Ryan. Carter didn't bother showing. He'd sent a 2-line email. You two can handle it. This is your chance to shine. I knew what that meant. If it went well, Ryan would get the credit. If it blew up, the blame would land squarely on me. The call opened with small talk, but I could tell right away the tone had shifted. The client's lead, Daniel, usually warm and easygoing, was different. His camera angle was lower, his tie actually tightened. He wasn't here to be friendly. Let's start with vendor mapping, Daniel said. Ryan, since you're coming on board, why don't you walk us through the latest compliance checks? My chest tightened. That was a deliberate test. They'd bypassed me on purpose. Ryan grinned, nodded, and started spitting out the usual word salad. We're aligning legacy dependencies with scalable frameworks to streamline outcomes. Daniel didn't blink. Specifics, please. Which vendors cleared audit last quarter and which are flagged for remediation? Ryan's smile faltered. He glanced at me, then at his notes, which were empty because he hadn't prepared. The majority are cleared, and we're in progress on the flagged. Which ones? Daniel pressed. The silence stretched. I felt the air in the room shift, like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, I slid my screen share live. Here, I said calmly. This sheet tracks every vendor by audit cycle. You'll see vendor 14 and vendor 23 are still in remediation with specific clauses tied to section 5.2 of your compliance framework. Everything else has cleared. Daniel's pen tapped twice. Then he smiled, but it wasn't at Ryan. It was at me. That was the first tell. The rest of the session played out the same way. Ryan would chime in with buzzwords. I'd step in with details. At one point, he actually repeated one of my answers, almost word for word, seconds after I'd said it, like an echo with worse grammar. The client managers exchanged a look. Not a subtle one either. But the real crack came later. While I was walking them through a mitigation timeline, I saw Ryan's laptop screen reflected faintly in the glass behind him. He was forwarding files again. This time, not just one doc, but a whole folder, zipped and attached to the same personal Gmail I'd clocked earlier. I didn't stop him. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I answered the next question with precision, bookmarking my points against the compliance manual they knew by heart. Meanwhile, my own laptop quietly logged the version history, the access timestamp, and the fact that the file had left the secure drive. That was strike 2 for him. Strike 3 came almost immediately after. Daniel asked, "Can you confirm none of the pilot workflows have been exposed to client data yet?" His tone was too casual. It wasn't a real question. It was bait. Ryan jumped at it. "Yes, of course. They've been tested with live samples, and..." I cut him off so fast the words almost collided. "Correction. No live client data has been used. All testing has been done with synthetic, anonymized samples. The pilot isn't cleared for client-facing use." I looked straight at Daniel, and it shouldn't be until legal signs off. Ryan blinked, realizing too late what he'd said. Daniel's expression didn't change, but his pen moved. 3 words. He wrote them big enough that I could see the motion of his hand even on the grainy video feed. "She knows." The session ended with polite thanks, but I felt the weight behind their smiles. This wasn't just about deliverables anymore. They were assessing trust, and Ryan had just failed. After the call, he leaned back in his chair like nothing had happened. "Not bad," he said. "Team effort." I didn't reply. I was staring at the notification on my screen. File shared externally. Owner, Ryan. Time, 8:47 p.m. That was the second note burned into memory. The funny thing about corporate warfare? The villains always think they're invisible. They think nobody's watching when they cut corners, when they pass off other people's work, when they gamble with compliance because no one will notice. But someone always notices. And this time, it wasn't just me, it was the client. When people imagine whistleblowers or office heroes, they picture dramatic moments. Someone slamming a binder on the table, announcing, "I've got the proof." Reality is slower, quieter. It's the kind of war fought with version histories, forwarded emails and screenshots buried so deep they look meaningless until you line them up side by side. I started with the versions. Every file Ryan touched left fingerprints. A decimal shifted here, a clause removed there. At first glance, it looked like sloppy edits. But when I compared his versions to mine, a pattern emerged. The edits always introduced risk. A number rounded down so it no longer matched the audit trail. A compliance checkpoint quietly deleted. A date advanced by 2 weeks, pushing deliverables outside the approved cycle. It was subtle, but consistent. So I built a folder no one else could see. Inside, I kept 2 copies of every document, Carter's version and mine. Side by side, the differences screamed louder than any accusation could. Next came the access logs. Our system tracked every login, every download, every share. Most employees never bothered looking. They assumed IT would handle it if anything went wrong. But I knew better. At 8:47 p.m., when Ryan forwarded that folder to his Gmail, the log recorded it. At 9:12 p.m., when Carter opened the pilot files and marked them as client-ready, the log recorded that too. Each timestamp was a breadcrumb. Then came the screenshots. Ryan liked to tinker during meetings, probably thinking nobody noticed, but I'd caught the reflection of his laptop once before. So the next time, I angled my webcam just enough to catch his screen in the glass panel behind him. One print screen later, I had an image of him dragging confidential files into a personal zip folder. Mid-call, not crystal clear, but clear enough. A colleague in ops helped without realizing it. She pinged me late one night. "Hey, weird request. Carter asked me to fast-track permissions for Ryan. Did you know?" I didn't, but I took note. Another breadcrumb. Piece by piece, the dossier grew. It wasn't dramatic. It was meticulous. 100 tiny cuts forming a case file sharp enough to slice through denials. And while I worked, I kept asking myself, why? Why go through all this trouble to sideline me? Why risk the client relationship on a half-baked pilot? The answer came in a whisper from someone who'd been around longer than me. One of the senior ops guys, the type who knew where the bodies were buried, leaned across his cubicle one night when he thought nobody was listening. "Carter's trying to automate you out," he said. "He promised leadership he could run the account with half the staff. Ryan's just the cover. If the pilot lands, you're gone." I didn't flinch, but my stomach dropped. This wasn't personal pettiness. It was economics. I was the expensive soft skill, the human layer Carter wanted stripped out so he could look like a genius cost cutter. Except he'd miscalculated one thing. The client didn't want cheap. They wanted safe, reliable, compliant. That was the currency they trusted, and Carter was gambling it away. That night, I sat alone at my desk, staring at the 2 parallel sets of files. In one, Carter's story. Flashy, shortcut heavy, risky. In the other, mine. Precise, clean, audit-proof. I thought about my rent, about my mother's medication bills stacked on my counter, about the fact that I'd clawed my way up here without family connections, without shortcuts. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to break. I wrote up the clean, compliant path forward. Not for Carter, not even for the client yet, but for myself. A timeline that worked, that met every regulation, that closed every gap. A blueprint so strong it couldn't be ignored. Because sooner or later, the moment would come when someone asked, "Who has the receipts?" And when that moment arrived, I wanted to be ready to drop them on the table without hesitation. The irony? I didn't have to set a trap. Carter and Ryan were building it for me. All I had to do was keep collecting the evidence while they tied the rope tighter around their own necks. By the time I shut my laptop that night, my secret folder was thick with proof. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like the hunter. Carter loved theatrics. He had this habit of swooping into meetings only when the hard work was already done, like a magician arriving after the assistants had set the stage. That Friday evening, he made his grand entrance. The client had asked for a recap call, nothing major, just a review of the progress before the weekend. I had my clean deck ready, time-stamped, bulletproof. Ryan sat beside me, scrolling his phone like he was waiting for an Uber. Then the door opened, and Carter strode in as if he'd been running the show the whole time. "Apologies for the delay," he said, settling into the head chair. "I wanted to personally deliver this update." I knew what that meant. He was about to take credit for work he hadn't done. For the first 10 minutes, that's exactly what he did. He presented my slides, sprinkling in buzzwords as though he'd crafted every detail. Ryan chimed in occasionally, parroting phrases Carter had fed him. And then, just as I thought we'd make it through the call without a blow-up, Carter went off script. "We've actually accelerated the pilot ahead of schedule," he announced, his voice smug. "I'm happy to say we pushed it live yesterday with a sample batch of your data." My heart slammed against my ribs. "No, he didn't." The client froze. Daniel's pen stopped mid-scribble. "You ran live data through the pilot?" His voice was low, controlled. Too controlled. Carter nodded. "Of course. Shows initiative. We wanted to prove it's viable." I saw it in Daniel's eyes. The calculation, the disbelief, the anger just under the surface. The pilot wasn't cleared. It wasn't even legal under their compliance policy. Using live data meant an instant violation, one that could cost millions in fines. And just like that, the trap Carter had built around me snapped shut on him instead. Because the system flagged it immediately. An automated alert pinged on the client side. Red text scrolled across their dashboard. Compliance exception. Unauthorized workflow detected. Silence. Then Daniel leaned back slowly, his face expressionless. "We'll need to freeze all work pending an internal review." Carter's smile faltered. "That's unnecessary. We're just—" Daniel cut him off. "No. Effective immediately. No further deliverables until we investigate." The call ended in icy politeness. The second the screen went dark, Carter spun toward me. "What did you do?" That was his instinct. Blame. Always blame. I met his eyes and kept my voice calm. "Nothing. But if you'd like, I can provide the clean audit trail." The words landed like a grenade. Ryan's smirk evaporated. Carter's jaw clenched. He knew what I meant. I had the receipts. Every version, every timestamp, every change he and Ryan had made. For once, he didn't have a comeback. He just glared like he could will me into silence. But it was too late. The client had seen the flag. The review was coming, whether he liked it or not. And I wasn't scared anymore. Because in corporate war, sometimes you don't have to pull the trigger. Sometimes you just have to let the other side shoot themselves in the foot. And then show up with the paperwork, proving you weren't the one holding the gun. That night, walking out of the building, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. The game wasn't over, but for the first time, it wasn't Carter's game anymore. Boardroom oxygen. That's what it feels like when the air disappears, when every word weighs more than its sound, when silence can kill careers. The Monday after Carter's stunt, I walked into a conference call that looked nothing like our usual client check-ins. Procurement was there. InfoSec was there. Legal was there. These weren't project managers anymore. These were the people who carried termination authority. Daniel started calmly. We've reviewed the flagged incident. We need a chronology. His eyes locked on Carter. Carter smiled the way only guilty men smile. Too wide, too rehearsed. Of course. It was a small misstep, easily corrected. My team... Which team member initiated the pilot with live data? Legal cut in, sharp. Carter hesitated, just long enough to betray himself. Then he gestured vaguely toward me. We were testing alternatives. She might have... My pulse hammered. This was it. The moment everything could tilt against me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply opened my folder, shared my screen, and said, "Would you like the clean audit trail?" Click. On their screens appeared a chronological log. Every version, every timestamp, every edit. Side-by-side comparisons showing Carter's red lines, stripping out safeguards. Ryan's access logs, forwarding files externally. The pilot folder marked client ready under Carter's account. And, most damning, the automated system note. Unauthorized workflow initiated by Carter, 1942, Friday. Silence again, but not the dangerous kind. The heavy, undeniable kind. InfoSec leaned forward. "We'll need copies of these logs." "Already exported," I said. Carter's face tightened. "These can be misinterpreted on... She's been collecting..." Daniel cut him off. "No, they're clear." Ryan panicked. He tried to delete messages from Slack threads on his laptop, but it was pointless. Corporate archives are permanent. Every revision, every oops, is etched forever in servers you can't touch. HR joined the next call. They spoke in that flat, careful tone that signals blood in the water. "We're opening a formal investigation. We'll need statements from all parties." Carter tried one last spin. "We can't overreact. This is a talented team. We should focus on solutions, not witch hunts." Procurement's voice was ice. "Our solution depends on trust. Right now yours is broken." That was the oxygen drop. The moment Carter realized the walls had closed in, the rest of the week blurred into interviews and document reviews. HR asked me to walk through my process, not once, but 3 times. Each time I gave the same calm, consistent answers. No drama, no speculation, just facts. Every word aligned with the evidence. Meanwhile, Carter paced hallways like a caged animal. Ryan avoided eye contact entirely. The same kid who'd smirked at me weeks ago now looked like he was waiting for a trap door to open under his chair. By Thursday, rumors had spread across the office. People whispered in break rooms, pinged me on Slack with cautious messages. "Are you okay? What really happened?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Because in situations like this, words don't save you. Proof does. And I had it. The tension peaked Friday morning, a joint call. Client leadership, our firm's board rep, HR, legal. I dialed in with steady hands, though my stomach churned. Carter tried one final Hail Mary. "The real issue here is lack of alignment. I've been pushing innovation, but certain team members resisted, slowed us down. This was never malice. It was ambition." I let him finish. Then Daniel leaned in, voice like steel. "Ambition doesn't excuse negligence. We didn't lose faith in your team because of her. We lost it because of you." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Carter opened his mouth to reply, but HR muted him, and for the first time in weeks, I exhaled. The fight wasn't over. Findings still had to land, but the balance had shifted. The truth wasn't a secret anymore. It was on the record, in the hands of the people who mattered. And Carter knew it. Consequences in corporate life don't drop like a hammer. They unfold like a memo, slowly with layers of signatures and carefully chosen words that mean everything once you learn to read between the lines. The findings landed on a Tuesday. A 30-page report, circulated under the subject line, Corrective Action Plan, Client Account. It was the kind of document most people skim. I read every line. The verdict was brutal. Carter was formally removed from the client account, effective immediately. His leadership decisions were cited as the cause of material risk to contractual obligations. Translation: he'd gambled with the client's trust and lost. Ryan didn't fare better. His unauthorized access, the Gmail forwarding, the doctored metrics, all documented, all confirmed. The report called it breach of protocol and potential exfiltration of confidential materials. HR's recommendation: termination pending final review. The client's decision was even sharper. Procurement issued a statement: contract renewal contingent on third-party oversight of all future deliverables. That wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a knife to the heart of Carter's plan. Because the third-party auditor they named? A boutique consultancy, one that had just recruited me to lead the engagement. Yes, the very client Carter tried to impress had turned around and handed me the keys. The irony was almost poetic. The man who'd said, "meet your replacement," had been replaced. By me, not inside the firm, but sitting across from it, holding more power than he ever did. When the news broke internally, the office went quiet. People glanced at me in hallways, whispered behind half-closed doors. Some pinged me privately. "Congrats." Others, "Be careful. They won't forgive you for this." I didn't reply. Revenge wasn't something I wanted to gloat about. It was already done, clean and professional, the way true revenge always is. No shouting, no theatrics. Just paperwork, evidence, and consequences that couldn't be spun away. Carter tried, of course. He cornered me in the elevator one evening, his face tight with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think this is over? You made enemies, you know." I looked at him steady. "I didn't make enemies. I kept records." The doors opened. I walked out. He didn't follow. Meanwhile, Ryan disappeared overnight. His badge deactivated, his desk cleared before morning. One day he was smirking in meetings. On the next, he was a rumor. The kind of vanishing act only HR can engineer. The client, on the other hand, was anything but subtle. At the next joint session, Daniel addressed me directly. "We've reviewed your documentation. We appreciate your diligence. Going forward, we expect your team to align with the external oversight you'll be leading." Carter wasn't even invited to that call. I sat there listening, nodding, while inside I felt something shift. Not triumph, not glee, just a deep, quiet satisfaction. The kind that comes when balance is restored. Corporate revenge isn't about watching someone burn. It's about watching the truth weigh more than the lies. About seeing competence outlast politics. About knowing the receipts matter more than the rhetoric. And in that moment, I knew. The fight was finished. But the story wasn't over, because the real ending wasn't about Carter losing. It was about me stepping into a role no one could take away. One built not on family connections, not on manipulation, but on proof. And proof, once out, doesn't go back in the box. After the storm, silence. That's what struck me first. No more urgent late-night pings. No more calendar ghosts from Carter. No more frantic fix-this requests disguised as coaching. The noise was gone. Carter didn't disappear overnight. Men like him rarely do. He lingered, stripped of authority, reassigned to an internal strategy role that everyone knew was exile with a salary. His name vanished from client decks. His updates never left the building. The man who once strutted across conference rooms now shuffled between meetings that didn't matter, a ghost of his own making. People stopped looking at him the way they used to. The fear evaporated. In its place came something worse, indifference. He wasn't the power anymore. He was just there. Ryan didn't even get that. HR confirmed his termination with a 2-sentence email. "Employee has been separated. Please redirect any questions." No one asked questions. His desk stayed empty for weeks, until facilities finally wheeled it away. If anyone remembered him, it was only as the kid who thought shortcuts could buy him respect. Meanwhile, my world shifted. The first day I walked into the client's offices as an external lead, badge clipped to my jacket, I felt the weight of everything that had happened. Same company name on the contracts, Same glass-walled rooms, but the power dynamic had flipped. I wasn't the employee waiting for approval anymore. I was the one setting expectations. Daniel greeted me with a firm handshake. "Welcome aboard," he said. No smirk, no condescension, just respect. The kind you don't have to demand, the kind you earn. In quiet moments, I thought back to the night it all started. Overtime, empty floor, Carter's voice in the doorway. "Meet your replacement," and I'd carried that sentence like a stone in my chest, heavy and sharp. But now, standing in a position he couldn't touch, the weight was gone. Because the truth is, I was never the one being replaced. He was. Not with noise, not with shortcuts, not with spin, but with competence, patience, and receipts no one could deny. The office gossip died down eventually. New scandals took their place. New names filled the rumor mill. That's how corporate always goes. The machine grinds forward, indifferent to the people it chews up. But me? I'd stepped out of the machine. I wasn't prey anymore. I wasn't even a survivor. I was something Carter could never be. Trusted. And trust, once broken for him, was never coming back. The last time I saw him, he was leaving the building late, shoulders hunched, face pale under the fluorescent lights. He didn't notice me, or maybe he did and just couldn't meet my eyes. Either way, I didn't stop him. I didn't need to. Karma had already done the work, quietly, efficiently, without fireworks. I passed the same glass walls on my way out, the same ones that had reflected Ryan's laptop, the same ones that had trapped me in those endless late nights. The city lights glowed outside, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel dread walking past them. I didn't look back, because sometimes the best revenge isn't watching someone fall, it's walking away taller with proof in your pocket and a future they can't touch. And that's exactly what I did.